Alright guys, now I know I said I was done with Spider-Man videos. I know I said I wasn't gonna review this game, and I wasn't planning on it. I really wasn't gonna review it. Personally, this was my most anticipated game. I wanted to enjoy it alone without worrying about making a video for you guys. I'm sorry, sometimes I just need some stuff for myself. However, after beating it, I realized that I got a lot to say about it. Everybody's playing it, everybody's talking about it, but is it actually good? Yeah, it's pretty good. And the good stuff in this game is really, really, really good, like flawless. But the bad stuff is pretty distracting. And a lot of people aren't talking about the bad stuff, which is weird. However, I should mention that as a whole, this game is good. So we're going to talk about the first thing that I like, the gameplay. The gameplay in Spider-Man PS4 is split into two sections for the most part. You got Spider-Man stuff, and you got non-Spider-Man stuff. But let's talk about the Spider-Man stuff first, because this is the best part of the game. Everything you do as Spider-Man feels perfect. Everything works. If you want to do it, it'll probably work. There is so much polish, and the amount of unique animations that Spider-Man has are insane. He has different animations depending on where he's perching. Peter will do a unique animation if he's running up a fire escape or something else that's not a flat surface. Using the right trigger just lets you move seamlessly through environments, though you might find that there's a little bit of a learning curve when it comes to Peter's locomotion. But once you get past that, swinging and running around the city feels satisfying, and it just makes sense. I honestly have no idea why they put fast travel in this game. A game like this should not have fast travel, because honestly, for 90% of the game, you're just going to be swinging around, and it's a good thing that it works. However, gameplay doesn't just focus on Spider-Man, as I've said before. You also have to play as regular Peter Parker and his buddies. The game comes to a grinding halt for you to do science puzzles as Peter or bad stealth missions as another character. Now I understand the concept behind breaking up Spider-Man levels with moments of slower paced action. This would make sense from a storytelling perspective if these were just cutscenes, but from a video game perspective, it makes the pacing really, really bad. Everything you do as Spider-Man is fluid and fun, and then everything that's not Spider-Man related is slow and sluggish and boring. The puzzles that you do as Peter Parker are really bad. They can be tricky at times, but they're never truly challenging because they don't really change that much. You'll only be doing the same two types of puzzles for the entire game. And yes, people are going to mention this before I even get a chance to. You can skip the puzzles, but that's kind of insulting to me. This kind of goes into a broader conversation about game design, but if you aren't confident enough to make them mandatory, then maybe you should reconsider their place in the game. The rest of the game exudes so much pride on the part of the developer. You can tell that they labored really hard over the swinging and the design of the world, and then you get these lazily made puzzles that they just let you skip. That's just bad game design, and I gotta be fair in pointing it out. And as I said, the Mary Jane levels are also bad. Now I like when games have well-designed stealth, so it makes me mad when bad stealth is forced into a game. If you know how to exploit the bad AI in these segments, you can basically just run through the levels without caring. Trust me, I did it. It wasn't hard. Now, these levels bother me for a completely different reason, because there's actually 2 or 3 of them that I really liked. Now, if you remove the non-Peter Parker segments, this game would probably be like 10 hours long. And once I realized that, I kind of got really annoyed. The best thing about these levels is that they usually give you insight on the world and the story from a perspective other than Peter's. And the best Mary Jane level in the game capitalizes on that, but there are a lot of Mary Jane levels and only a few of them are actually fun. I feel like if they put as much time into these as they did the Spider-Man stuff, this game would probably be perfect. But despite my whining, they don't even come close to ruining the game. Because when you're done walking around as MJ, you get to go back to punching people in the face as Spider-Man. Combat is probably my favorite part of the game. Reinforcements will flank you with ranged weapons on balconies or rooftops, forcing you to stay on the move at all times. And this is perfect because this is how Spider-Man fights. Spider-Man dies in like 2 hits. You really can't take any damage in this game. And this really fits the character because Spider-Man isn't a beefcake. If he gets shot, he's screwed. A lot of your gadgets are one-hit KOs, but they have limited uses, so you're encouraged to improvise, and that's what makes combat so fun. improvisation. You can get through the same fight a dozen different ways. You can use the environment to get some kills, you can just engage in a straight up brawl if your reflexes are fast enough, you can even pick off enemies from afar if you really want to. But stealth isn't always optional, and as a fan of stealth games, I'm relieved that it's done well for the Spider-Man parts. Unlike in the MJ levels, when you're playing as Spider-Man, the stealth feels just as fluid as the combat. Sometimes I'd restart levels if I got seen by someone just to see if an encounter was possible without a full frontal assault. Now, one thing that I was a little disappointed in were the lack of boss fights, because the few boss fights that you get ranged from really fun to just kind of okay. You can approach almost every combat encounter in a dozen different ways, but that doesn't count for the boss fights. The boss fights have one solution most of the time. And 90% of the time, that one solution is going to consist of you swinging around, dodging attacks, attacking them when their guard is down, then doing that again, and then the boss gets a little stronger and they have a few different attacks, but you're still going to swing around, dodge them, then attack them, and then you beat the fight. That's it. Aside from the last few bosses, that's kind of how it goes for most of the game. I was really surprised that there weren't more chase sequences against other supervillains. That's usually kind of a staple in Spider-Man games, and you only have one, and it's against Shocker of all people. And I actually really liked this part. I thought it was really fun chasing around a superpowered asshole through the city, but you never do that again in the whole game. However, despite all that, playing as Spider-Man is really fun in this game. It's so fun that it even manages to trick you into doing some really dumb shit, like catching pigeons or doing some stupid side quests. And I'm not even dissing the game right now. The game is so fun that it makes stupid things more enjoyable. And if you ask me, that's kind of what being Spider-Man's all about. Sometimes he's gotta do some stupid shit, and I'm fine with that. Now, main story missions will either occur in the open world or in designed levels. If you guys saw my video on the PS1 Spider-Man game, you know that I love intricate designed levels. The interiors are so surprisingly big and detailed, and some of my favorite levels have very little combat or swinging around. When I got to the Halloween level, I thought to myself, I really like this game. But all that hard work didn't just go to the levels. The open world is the most vibrant city that I've ever seen in a superhero game. All the older Spider-Man games have these perfectly rectangular, perfectly lined up buildings that look like they're made out of plastic, which makes sense considering when those games came out. But this game has unique, varied architecture with windows that have little mini dioramas to create depth when you swing past them. You might see people chilling, having a party on a rooftop. You can walk around and interact with civilians. There are just so many little details in this world, I could do a whole video on that on its own. Plus, this game has the most beautiful lighting that I think I've ever seen. I normally couldn't give two shits about graphical quality, but this is one darn good looking game. Each one of Peter's suits seems to be made out of a different fabric, which is just insane to me. Water effects also look really nice, and I wish you could just adjust the weather post-game because the rain looks so good. Hell, this is the first game where I've actually used photo mode. Trying to get cool pictures is actually really fun, and there are even points where you can take selfies while you're waiting to be executed by terrorists, which is great. The facial expressions in this game are also completely on point. Despite the photorealism of the world, I was completely immersed. I wasn't pulled out by any uncanny valley expressions. Everybody looks and feels like a real person. The facial expressions and vocal performances work together to create a surprising amount of subtlety. You can see a lot about the characters with just the smallest interactions.
Did you just leave your clothes on the kitchen floor?
Honestly, Yuri Lowenthal's performance as Peter is the biggest surprise in this entire game. When I heard he was Spider-Man, I was kinda worried I was just gonna hear Sasuke Uchiha as Spider-Man, but his performance is very deep. When he has to cry, you actually feel like this dude is in the recording booth crying like a baby. And that's something you don't hear often in video game voice acting. In fact, this version of Peter is the most accurate that I've seen in anything that isn't a comic book. Peter has the perfect balance of the easygoing, confident superhero and the thoughtful, empathetic New Yorker. His humor never gets on your nerves, and I actually laughed at some of the jokes, which is something I was not expecting to do. And the best thing is, he attempts to make friends at every opportunity. Every single quest or side quest, he's being the nicest dude ever. Normally, I would not give a shit about a random quest NPC, but since Peter cares, I care. He comes across as incredibly charming, and there is never a moment where you aren't happy to be playing as Peter Parker. And this is a good thing because it contributes to the overall quality of the story as well. And might I say, this is a perfect Spider-Man narrative. I did not want to beat the story as quick as I did. I beat it in 2 days, and that's just because I wanted to know what was happening in the story. It was that good. This Spider-Man universe takes elements from almost every other piece of Spider-Man media. There's stuff from the main Marvel comics, the Ultimate comics, the current MCU movies, the Sam Raimi movies, even the fucking amazing Spider-Man movies. I'm not joking. That's just how good the writing is in this game, and you guys know that out of everything, when I critique something, I look at the writing first, and this game has good-ass writing. Insomniac seems to have realized that Spider-Man means something different to everybody. They took elements from every single Spider-Man franchise imaginable, and they crammed them together into one project. And it works really well. So no, I don't have any deal breakers this time. I don't have anything in the game that completely pissed me off. I think the non-Peter Parker segments could definitely have used more time in the oven, and I'm hoping the sequel improves on them. And that's the thing, even with the stuff I don't like, I don't want it to be removed from the game. They just weren't executed very well here, so I'm hoping they improve in the next one. But overall, the game is really fun, and it's very heartwarming. It just feels good to play this game. That's the best thing I can say about it. It makes you feel good. And when it comes to Spider-Man media, that's the most important thing. It is by far the best Spider-Man game ever made. No contest. So I'm going to give this bad boy an 8 out of 10. I know that sounds kind of low, but it's a good 8 out of 10. A nice, solid 8 out of 10. No more Spider-Man videos. Leave me alone.